Well, let me say hello to everyone. I'm Miyoko Schinner. I am what I call an Epicurean activist, out to change the world for animals, people, and the planet. I have been a longtime entrepreneur. I've been in the vegan food scene since the mid 1980s when I became vegan. And ever since then, I've been writing cookbooks, starting businesses, restaurant, natural food companies, vegan food companies, um, all sorts of things like that. And I have an animal sanctuary where we rescue animals and have a youth program. Today, what takes most of my working time this minute, actually, or for the next few months, is trying to get my next cookbook finished. So I have a deadline with a publisher, and I spend a lot of time back on the bench, meaning that I'm creating these new cheeses and recipes that are plant dairy so that I can get my recipes done and get the manuscript off to the publisher. I was born in Japan, not eating any dairy products at all, which is why it's kind of strange when people say, well, why is the queen of vegan cheese Japanese? Because I didn't really have that history. I came to the United States when I was about 7 years old, and I had cheese for the first time when it was on a pizza, and I didn't really enjoy it. But I worked really hard because I wanted to be American. So I had to learn to love my cheese, and boy, did I fall in love with cheese eventually. And I became a huge connoisseur, especially of the rich, unctuous, funky flavored cheeses from all over the world. And I threw fancy cheese parties. And then when I went vegan in my mid-20s, it was like, oh my God, what am I going to do? I can never have cheese. And I figured out other ways to satisfy that desire. And I kind of left cheese alone because I didn't think it was possible to recreate it. I had a restaurant in the 1990s in San Francisco, and there I tried to serve a couple of cheesy things. We had a seitan parmigiana that had a mozzarella made out of oat cheese, for example. And we had an antipasto platter with this sort of fermented tofu cheese in the middle. So I had a few initial trials at making cheese, but I learned along the way that there were so many other ways that I could actually satisfy that desire for rich, delicious, unctuous flavors that I kind of let cheese alone for a while until the 2000s when I decided, okay, this is on my bucket list. I got to figure out how to do this. One of the issues with animal cheese is that it contains a byproduct of the protein breaking down, casein breaking down, which releases something that is akin to an opiate called casomorphine. And so cheese is not only addictive because it's just delicious, it's addictive because it actually has a biological substance in it that makes you addicted. Plant-based cheeses today commercially are sometimes I would have to say I'd have to classify them as ultra-processed foods. A lot of the stuff that's available today is unfortunately just made out of oil and starch, usually the worst forms of oil. And so I can't really recommend them, which is why I really thought that it was important to try to discover a new way to make cheeses, embracing whole foods. And hence I wrote my very first cheese cookbook, 2012, Artisan Vegan Cheese. And today there are thousands of cheesemakers, vegan cheesemakers all over the world that are taking a more whole foods approach to cheese making. And I celebrate that. Right now I'm working on my new cookbook, The Homemade Vegan Creamery, which takes that even several steps further, I believe, where I'm exploring the entire world of plant milks. So from everything that you can possibly think of, all sorts of nuts and seeds and even beans, and then using fermentation and coagulation to create those cheesy flavors and textures. My earliest memories of wanting to be a chef. Well, okay, let's just go back a little further. I became a vegetarian when I was 12. And a few months later, my mother announced that she wasn't cooking for me anymore. So I had to learn to cook. And that's when I first fell in love with cooking. So I started reading all these books and reading cookbooks and experimenting. And I really fell in love with cooking, especially with a lot of cheese. The idea of becoming a chef really happened when I became a vegan, and I even entertained the idea of going to culinary school because I was so enamored with cooking. But if I'd gone to culinary school, not only would I have had to use dairy products, I would have had to have dealt with meat, which I didn't want to do. So my earliest inspiration actually was Julia Child. I worked my way through mastering the art of French cooking, and I tried to veganize every single recipe using seitan, which was something that was not really well known here in the United States. But I was living in Japan at the time. And so there's a Buddhist tradition of using these mock meats. And so I used that. I tried to come up with different ways to make things like butter and heavy cream using nuts like cashews, etc., soy as well. And so really, Julia Child was my earliest inspiration and really my culinary instructor who taught me how to do things like make reduction sauces, a demi-glace. I created a way to make a delicious demi-glace sauce back in the 1980s, for example. So that was my earliest culinary inspiration. And at one point, I wanted to start a restaurant in Japan. And that's a whole other story of what happened with that and my involvement with the Yakuza at the time. But that's for another tale. But that was really in my mid-20s was when I thought, okay, I want to do this professionally. After a long day, if I'm just by myself, a quick fix would just be braised vegetables. I just love simply prepared vegetables with a little bit of olive oil, a little bit of broth, steamed, and I can just eat an entire bowl of it. I just find that so satisfying. I think my earliest inspiration for food about learning how to cook was Julia Child. And I loved her show, The French Chef. She was a riot. Her sense of humor, her voice, I just absolutely loved all of that. I loved her cookbooks. Also, there was an American book called The Joy of Cooking, which was another one that I worked through. And I think I just learned a lot of the skills from books like that. They weren't vegan or vegetarian cookbooks, but I learned techniques. So where do I think plant-based food is going? I don't think it's going the direction that the predominant players in the industry think it's going. I don't think it's going to be around products on shelves that are ultra processed. I really think that chefs are going to lead the way. Chefs that can take the humble vegetable, a humble bean, and just turn it into something that's absolutely glorious, that inspires people. I think that people that are non-vegans are looking for healthier ways to and more delicious ways to cook with vegetables and beans. They don't know how because the center of the plate has always been something animal-centric. And so most people haven't learned how to make delicious creations out of beans and vegetables. But as the world wakes up to the need to eat more sustainably and healthfully, I think the average person is looking to the chef to teach them what do I do with cauliflower? What do I do with Brussels sprouts? What do I do with lentils? And what's the future of cheese? I think it's going to be the evolution of cheese. Let's just talk about that. Okay, so cheese was an accident that happened when supposedly somebody put some milk into the lining of some sort of bag that was made out of the stomach of a rumen of a cow, and there's rennet in there, and that coagulated it, and that turned into cheese. So it was sort of a happy accident. And every single cheese that's happened to date has been somewhat of an accident, depending on the environment, the location. The story behind Roquefort was there was a shepherd, and he had a hunk of cheese, and there was a beautiful girl, and so he hid his cheese behind a rock and he took off. And when he came back a few weeks later to retrieve his cheese, there was this lovely blue mold on it, and he ate it, and it was fabulous. So cheese is sort of an evolution. It's sort of happened, and it's also involved human ingenuity and creativity. We have cow's milk cheese, and then we have sheep's milk and goat's milk, and they don't try to imitate each other. Each milk has its own characteristics, and they create different varieties of cheeses. If we evolve that into the realm of plant milk, we can think about cheese in the same way. Rather than using a different plant milk and saying, we're going to try to replicate cheddar exactly or Gruyere exactly, why not let each plant milk express its own unique properties. And let's create new cheeses. So I believe the future of cheese is getting back to plant milks rather than trying to replicate animal cheeses using oil and starch. But let's explore the world of plant milks and find out what flavors and textures can we create from them. It's an entire evolution that will continue into the future. We've got a couple thousand years to get it right.